Okay, folks, we're going to get started. We're going to call the meeting to order. And for introduction of late items, there is none. A approval for agenda. Agenda for the regular council meeting for June 15th, 2021 be approved. Do I have a motion, please? Second. Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Minutes from previous meeting. We have a recommended resolution that the minutes from the regular council meeting that was held on May 18th, 2021 be adopted. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. And that the minutes from the committee of the whole meeting that was held on May 25th, 2021 be adopted, as well as the committee of the whole meeting that was held on June 8th, 2021 be adopted. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Okay, petitions and delegations, we don't have any today. I'm sorry? Oh, we have background noise. Can I get everybody to mute, please? We have a TV or something on. Thank you. Correspondence. We have from the District of Saanich and BC Road Builders 2021 Strategic Plan. Do I have a recommended resolution that the correspondence A and B be received? Motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carried. Okay, council report. There are none. Reports on committees, none. The mayor's report. I believe you all may have had the chance to read that. We have a couple of studies coming up. Of course, there was some opposition from the 4 of the directors on the SRD. All this is studies that are going to be done. They're looking at ways to improve services in the SRD. Obviously, there were some of us that were fully supportive of that motion. That probably is not going to be available to the fall, so we're not going to know what's going to happen or any resolutions coming forth on improvements at that time. But just to give you guys a heads up on that. Is there any questions regarding the mayor's report? No. Okay, recommended resolution that the report from Mark Baker be received. Motion, please.
I'll move that.
Second.
I'll second.
Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Unfinished business? We have none. And on to number 11, staff reports, the permissive tax exemptions for 2022. CAO?
Thank you, Mayor Baker. This report, as the CFO just described, is an information report that staff bring forward for information and discussion, so that we, and with an included schedule for decision making on those agencies which are eligible and who have indicated an interest to go through the tax exemption process. So with that, I'd like to please hand it over to the CFO to take you through the staff report, please.
Okay, thank you to Mayor and Council. So basically, this is just a report outlining the process for permissive tax exemptions for 2022. So if Council is going to consider exemptions for 2022, that needs to be done before October 31st is when a decision needs to be sent off to BC Assessment for them to exempt the property and therefore provide a permissive tax exemption for the entity that is exempted. There's two entities expiring, their permissive tax exemptions are expiring in 2021, and that is the Sayward Community Health Society and Sayward Future Society. So I've just input a little chart there in my staff report, basically just outlining the value of the permissive exemption for 2021, just for information purposes. There's a little star there beside value of permissive exemption, and I didn't note what that star meant. That was a little typo, but what I was going to put in the report was those figures are just municipal taxes. That doesn't include the other taxes that are also exempted as part of a permissive tax exemption. So that would include school, library, police, all of the other taxes. If council wants, I can give you those figures. You know, it's going to be over and above what those are, because again, that's just the municipal portion. So what I've done is on page 52, I've just included a little timetable as to the process for exemptions. So what I'm proposing is sending letters out on June 18th to Sayward Future Society would be the only entity that would receive a letter. And that's because we've received a letter from Sayward Community Health Society that they will not be applying for a permissive tax exemption for 2022. And I've included that letter for your reference. And then in June 21st, we would advertise that council will consider additional exemptions. So if there's any other groups, societies in the village that council's unaware of that would want a permissive tax exemption, we would advertise that council will consider that. And we would put in the advertisement that there's an application process, which is part of the policy. We would provide all that information to the entity and gather all that information. Deadline for applications would be August 1st. Staff would bring a report back to council on September 7th, and a decision would be made at that time. And then there's a bylaw that needs to be created and approved by council, which then gets sent off to BC Assessment by the deadline of October 31st. I've also included just some information on other permissive exemptions that the Village of Sayward has provided. Nature Trust has 4 properties that council has given permissive tax exemption for, and I've included the value for those as well. And the other one is the Royal Canadian Legion Sayward Valley branch. I don't know why it's called Sayward Valley branch. It might just be Sayward branch, but that could be a typo as well. So that's basically the gist of my report. If there's any questions, I can try to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions for the CFO? No? Okay, thank you. So is it a resolution, that the permissive tax exemption for 2022 staff report be received for information and discussion, and that the staff be directed to advertise the tax exemption process and the outlined in this report? Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
I'll second it.
Discussion. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Under B, the Village of Sayward 2020 Annual Report Statement Financial Information. CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Through Mayor Baker to council, this is a staff report to introduce the 2020 annual report and the statement of financial information. As the staff report indicates, there's a requirement in the community charter for local governments to table an annual report and to have it made available to the public for a minimum of 14 days. We're proposing that that would start tomorrow and end on June the 30th. And then the report would come back to council in July for approval. Essentially, the annual report is intended to include the audited financial statements, any tax exemptions that have been provided, the municipal services and the operations for the previous year, general progress report and some municipal objectives. And generally, all of that is filtered through the strategic plan that identifies council's priorities and the areas of strategic importance. And so the 2020 annual report is basically a compilation of the progress that the two councils made last year on a number of initiatives. And so it's there for council to review. And to give direction to staff. Of course, if there's changes that need to be made, we would quickly do those and then, of course, amend our 14-day period. So that's the annual report for council to provide feedback on or to give direction on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So recommended resolution that the 2020 annual report and statement of financial information staff report be received for information and discussion. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
discussion. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Second is that the 2020 annual report be made available for public viewing for a minimum of 14 days, beginning on June 16th and ending on June 30th. The report will be returned to council and public comments at the July 20th council meeting. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Thank you. Second,
I'll second it.
discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Reserve policy, CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Council will recall that a couple of months ago, staff came forward with some reports and included a recommendation for staff to proceed with setting up a reserve policy. And so the council passed a couple of resolutions at that meeting that staff returned with a draft reserve policy to identify how and when and how much funds will be transferred into a reserve policy. And so basically the CFO has taken her fine pen to this exercise and come forward with a draft framework, I guess, that shows the sorts of minimum and maximum contributions that council may wish to consider on specific items so that we're in a better position to handle contingencies, accidents, disasters, infrastructure failures, or a range of issues. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to the CFO, who's done all the good work on this initiative, and ask please for her to introduce this and take you through the report.
Thank you.
Thank you to Mayor and Council. So basically this report, I wasn't bringing forth a reserve policy at this meeting. So we did present a schedule to council at a couple meetings ago. It might have been last meeting, basically just outlining, again, the schedule and an action. And for this particular meeting tonight, it's basically just some information for council on reserve policies, what they generally include, basically just some information that staff have done some research on other policies from other municipalities, and sort of like a starting point for getting this reserve policy prepared and presented to council, which according to the schedule would be at the next meeting in July. So basically what I've done is I did a bunch of research. Municipalities, regional districts, they all sort of differ as to their needs and what they want in a reserve policy. Budget size is different. Strategic plans are going to be different. So there really isn't one policy that sort of fits for everybody. There wasn't sort of a template that I could look at or sort of get information from one. It's really going to be all over the place, and we're going to be pulling information from everywhere to kind of pull this together. So basically, a reserve policy contains the following main pieces. I've just listed them there. It has a purpose, objectives, and definitions section. It includes roles and responsibilities, procedures for the establishment of reserves, target values for each reserve. So that's going to have your minimum levels in the reserve and your optimal level, and also acceptable uses of reserve funds. And finally, recommendations on how and when the reserve policy is reviewed. So are you going to look at it annually? Are you going to look at it during financial plan sessions? Maybe you only look at it every couple of years, or maybe you do it when you do your strategic planning. So that would all be included in a reserve policy. And it's a living document, so it should always reflect the circumstances facing a municipality over time. Operations change, budgets change, so the policy should change with that as well. It's interesting to note that none of the municipalities on the North Island have a reserve policy document. So I did contact all of the municipalities, Gold River, Zabalis, Port Alice, Port Hardy, Port McNeil. None of them have a reserve policy. So for Sayward to do one, it's kind of, new, and we may be, a municipality that those municipalities look at when they're drafting their reserve policies. So, that's kind of interesting to note. So I've included a little chart here on page 93, basically with my recommendations on the reserves that I feel should be part of the policy document. And these reserves, they'll be formally established by a bylaw, reserve bylaw, as part of the process of this policy. So the first one is a capital reserve fund. That's going to be a fund for general capital projects that aren't specifically funded from other reserves. So it would just be, it wouldn't include water, it wouldn't include sewer, it would be a reserve that could be used to pay for buildings, equipment, vehicles, those sorts of capital items. And the column on the right, I've got balance as of January 1st. This particular reserve is a proposed new reserve. So it's zero. There's nothing in there right now. And that's why I've included those numbers. The next one would be a sewer capital reserve fund. So similar, capital items, basically sewer related. So anything to do with the pipes, a new sewage treatment plant down the line, anything of that nature. And right now there's about $5,000 sitting in a sewer capital reserve. The village does have that reserve on the books. Next one would be a water capital reserve fund. And that would be similar to sewer. It would fund water utility capital projects required for water operations. And that's a proposed new reserve. There's nothing in there right now. Next one would be transportation infrastructure reserve fund. That would be to fund road capital projects. And right now there's about 17,000 in that reserve. Current name of that reserve is Roads Reserve. We would change that to Transportation Infrastructure Reserve Fund, just in case there's other projects, coming up that aren't really roads related, but transportation related. Community Works Gas Tax Reserve Fund. That would be a reserve to account for funds received and used pursuant to the Community Works Gas Tax Agreement. And right now there's 278,000 sitting in that reserve. A lot of that has been budgeted towards the Newcastle Dam project. So, that's the balance as of January 1st. As we go through financial planning sessions, that's when we basically go through and say, here's how we're going to spend these reserve funds. And as I said, a good chunk of that's been already allocated to a project. Next reserve would be Fire Facilities and Equipment Reserve Fund, and that would be to fund the replacement of fire vehicles and equipment according to planned replacement schedules. So, basically that would be having the fire chief come to a meeting, state, 5 years from now, we're going to need a new engine number 4. Here's how much it's going to cost. What can we contribute? Really, realistically, a lot of these projects are going to be grant funded, where the village cannot fund a lot of these projects 100%. But if some reserves can be built up so that we can contribute a portion at least, then I think that's going to be beneficial. And that one is a proposed new reserve. So there's nothing in there right now. Flipping the page, the next one would be a Climate Action Reserve Fund. That one we already have, and that is to fund projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's about 23,000 in that reserve. COVID-19 Reserve Fund, that is to fund COVID-19 related expenditures. And, we've discussed that at previous council meetings, so I don't think I need to go through that. There's about 262,000 sitting in there as of January 1st. Next one would be a Land Sale Reserve Fund, and that's a statutory reserve fund. So in the community charter, there's a section 188, that talks about reserve funds, and some reserve funds are statutory, meaning that funds received for specific things must be put into these reserves. So this is if the village sold land or improvements, that money has to go into this reserve. It can't be used for anything else. And there's about 42,000 sitting in there right now. And the last one would be a Parkland Acquisition Reserve Fund. And again, that's a statutory reserve. And that's if the village receives funds for parkland on subdivision. Cash received for that must be put into a reserve. Right now, there's nothing in there. So again, that's a proposed new reserve. So when I bring the policy back to council in July, I will include all of this information. I'm sort of going to base it off of the District of Lake Country Reserved Fund policy, which was attached to this report. I think it's really straightforward. It's pretty clear to read. You know, I'm going to look at target values. It's usually based on some formula. You know, 5% of your operating expenditures goes into this reserve. That's your target. And then you've got an optimal level. So all of that I'll bring back to you in July. And, you know, when looking at the budget every year, that's when council would decide, okay, how are you going to reach these target levels? You know, it might take 5 to 10 years to reach a certain target. And how are you going to fund that? You know, there's options. You can increase revenues, you can decrease expenses. You know, that's something that would have to be discussed during financial planning sessions and how these reserves are going to be funded. So I think that's probably all I wanted to talk about on this report. And again, if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent work. Does anybody on council have any questions for the CFO? Councillor Tinsley.
Just a question about when you surveyed the other small communities up here, did they give any reason why they aren't setting up something similar at this time?
Yeah, through the mayor, Councillor Tinsley, most of the comments I received back was it's on their to-do list. So I think it's not a matter of they don't want to do it or they just don't need one. It's just a lot of these small communities are really limited in staff resources, and yeah, it's been put on the back burner and it's on the list to do.
Sorry, CFO, all the minimum and maximum percentages is set by council. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it is. So what I'm proposing is I'll bring something back to you in July. I'll bring you, you know, from my research and what I've seen on other reserve policies, I'll have some numbers for you. And then at that point you can, you know, decide whether those numbers are achievable, whether you want to increase them, decrease them, whatever it is you want to do with them. That's entirely up to council.
Thank you. So the reserve policy recommended resolution that the reserve policy staff report be received for information and discussion, and that the staff be directed to prepare a draft reserve policy incorporating the recommendations reserve fund outlined in this report. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Do I have discussion? Nope. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. I'm sorry, Councillor Kirschner, I can't see you.
I'm sorry.
There.
That was intentional. I'm smoking.
Oh, well, that's okay. Thank you. D, use of sewer surplus funds for procurement of 4 sewer lift station generators. CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I'd like to propose a slightly different recommendation here because we unfortunately found out today that we were not successful in seeking grant funding to obtain the 4 generators for the 4 lift stations. But when I wrote this report, I was still hopeful that we would receive that funding. And so that's why I had posted as preliminary council support. But in fact, I think what we'd like to have tonight is, if council's supportive of this, is council support for use of the sewer surplus funds to proceed with an invitation to tender in order to obtain the 4 lift stations for the 4 generators for the 4 lift stations. So essentially, this report identifies that staff have sought funding from various grant opportunities multiple years in a row I can see previous CEOs of AOs have applied for this funding. There's been steady applications made, and unfortunately, as we were informed today through the municipal affairs representative, again, we weren't successful. So I've asked that staff or that council consider directing staff to proceed with this invitation to tender so that we can go ahead and allocate some funds from the sewer service in order to obtain the generators in time for the fall storm season. And so council may have noted that the Village of Sayward does have a procurement policy, and that policy indicates some thresholds for funding. In this case, because we're looking at probably close to $150,000 in funding, the policy directs that we go through a request for quotes in order that we identify the best deal for obtaining services. So that's what this initiative is for. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommended resolution is that that the use of sewer surplus, funds, staff report be received for information and discussion, and that the staff be directed to proceed with the invitation to tender RFQ in accordance with the Village of Sayward's procurement policy number 08-03. First step in allocating surplus funds from the sewer service for procurement and installation of 4 generators at the sewer lift station. And finally, that the staff return to council with details from the invitation to tender from the RFQ to proceed with the 4 lift station generators. Do I have a motion, please? Second.
I'll second it.
Discussion. Anyone? Councillor Paulson. Councillor Paulson, you are muted.
I was just wondering if there is any way to look at a combination of funding if the quote comes back and we could we use funding from the sewer surplus as well as the coronavirus funds that we have? Would that be a possibility?
The COVID, correct me if I'm wrong, CAO, but the COVID money is not something that we can actually use for generators because it's not COVID related. And there's a rigid program with that we would have to answer to. Is that not correct, CAO?
Well, Mayor Baker, and through to council and Councillor Polson, we did inquire about this some time ago, months ago, actually. The criteria is quite general. And so, I was sort of hesitant to seek that approval from council to use those funds in case when we did our end of the year reporting, the province didn't support it. However, if we're going to use our own surplus sewer funds anyway, it's something council could consider, because the downside of being told by the province that we misapplied the COVID funding, which I think the chances of that are low, but still there's criteria there, and it's intended to be to recover after COVID. So, but in the event that they did say that, council would have a backup place to get those funds. So it is an opportunity to use that. I don't know really, it's councils all over the province are using those COVID funds for different things. And I'm hoping that some student does a grad thesis on comparing how they applied the criteria. But that is definitely an option that we could proceed with. And so I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Tinsley. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question around like the history. Obviously, the current system is very human resource based, right? It's been there for a long time. There's additional liabilities that we've all talked about, so it's almost a has to thing. Will the generators that we're looking at now be part of any future sewer system improvements as well? Like they're not going to change with sewer restructuring, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Through the chair to Councillor Tinsley, I think not. I think from what we know from the survey work that we've done, I think it's called Pipe-Eye or Pop-Eye, they're identifying some problems with this collection system itself, not the lift stations. So I think these are fine. What we were proposing, and one of the things that staff thought about in identifying the costs, was to try and obtain one price for full installation. So if there were some problems, that there would be just one place to point, rather than having one firm do the concrete pad, someone else do the fencing, someone else do the installation, and or maybe we do some of that. So yeah, that's probably the only real thing that could change the way that the funds would be applied, is just whether or not the quote is broken down to 2 or 3 different firms. I think it's in our interest to use just one. But and then if there's problems, well, there will be problems with the sewer. There will be some work required, and at that point, it may actually put a little bit more pressure on the lift stations, just because the increase in pressure in the actual system if leaks are plugged. But I don't think there'd be any issue with the actual lift stations themselves.
Councillor Craig?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just going off of what Councillor Polson had said to the CAO, we are already prepared to use the sewer, or put a motion forward to use the sewer surplus funds. However, we could dip into the COVID restart funds. I was under the impression that you had to ask permission first before using those funds, but apparently we can use those funds, and then if they can deny it later. So we're already at the position of preparing to use the sewer surplus funds, but we can always go back to that. So I say we should roll the dice and go with the COVID restart funds and take our chances, since we're already prepared to use Plan B anyway. Does that ring about right?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm somewhat reluctant to use the COVID money for that. I mean, that's we have roughly around $200,000 left of the COVID money, from what I understood. And the COVID money, in terms of a restart, it's almost, to me, a tough justification to tie in that with COVID. For myself, I mean, we're going to use the surplus on the sewer. I think we should just do it and have the funds, the COVID money, sitting aside for use of for what it's intended. That's my opinion. CAO?
Mayor Vicker, I would add that we really can use the COVID funds in quite a broad manner, so they can be used for a number of different strategies and initiatives, whereas the sewer surplus funds really can only be used for the sewer system. That's it. And I just would add that those sewer funds have been sitting there for quite a while, almost 10 years now. So they're basically surplus funds. It's the sort of funding you would put into a reserve policy at some point, is this excess funding that you've collected over time. So it does make sense to use them for this purpose, because this is the only purpose they can be applied towards, whereas the COVID funds could be used for a lot of things. However, we could use the COVID funds, and if they're not provided for in the reporting, then there's the backup. So it's really up to council. I think there's a number of ways to go here, but I would suggest that the COVID funding is a bit of a cushion that council didn't have. It's a nice little package to provide for a number of things that council might want to do in the future, whereas the sewer funds are really only limited to this service.
So answer a question for me. If, for example, we do use the COVID funding for the generators, and the government turns around at the end of the reporting and says, no, you cannot do that. How do we take the money out of the sewer and put it back into COVID funding?
I guess I would lean to the CFO to clarify this, but I think as long as we do everything in a clear way and leave a good track record and explain it for the auditors, and that we do use the sewer funds for sewer related services, we wouldn't be into trouble with the auditors on that. We might have to repay the money back through the COVID funding, but again, I think the chances of that are quite low. But again,
there's still a chance. I think we should just use, as you said, the sewer surplus is strictly used for that type of purpose, for the sewer, where the COVID money frees up money for us to be able to do so many other things that we're going to need, because quite frankly, we don't have much in the way of reserves now if something does happen, or a program that we want to get involved with. Anybody else want to comment on that? Councillor Craig?
Sure, I disagree with you. I think we should use the COVID money. I would like to see council take a vote on Plan A or Plan B, COVID money or sewer surplus funds, and let this council decide which direction they're going to take.
Okay. So let's bring it to a vote. So we need to come up with a motion here. We'll do two separate motions, I would assume. Is that not correct?
Well, I think, Mayor Baker, you could take a vote on the first one and, and if there isn't enough, vote on the second one, create a second motion.
Thank you. The recommended resolution that we use the the sewer surplus funds from the report for information and discussion. Okay. We did that, and that the staff be directed to proceed to that. We're already. And reserve. So I guess the motion is whether we use the sewer surplus funds for the 4 generators, for the 150,000 roughly for the generators. So we have a motion on the floor.
So moved.
Second. Second. Folks, you need a second, then you go into discussion, and you can vote it down if you so wish, but there still needs to be a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Discussion?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Tinsley.
Yep, got my hand up, got my hands down. I believe what Councillor Paulson was talking about was using, like, going to that fund, the COVID fund, for a portion of it, not saying we want to use all of it. So it's not an all or nothing thing. It's like we would want to use the surplus funds, but go to that fund for, say, a third or a half, and then if that works out, great. But we're not trying to use all of it, because certainly approaching the COVID fund for all of it is a lot of the money that's there, right? So that's just my clarifying thought.
When I made the motion, I was meaning a portion of that fund,
So,
not
Go
all.
ahead, Councillor Craig.
yeah, what kind of a portion is this council happy with? A 50-50 split, a 60-40 split, 70-30 split? Does somebody want to throw out some numbers where you're comfortable?
Okay, we'll let the CFO jump in here for a moment. CFO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Mayor and Council, I was maybe just going to, sorry, I don't want to interrupt the voting process here, but I was just going to suggest that maybe you want to wait on making a decision on this, and I can send you some information from the province on the COVID-19 funds. I do have a fact sheet that I believe I sent out to Council several months ago on what these funds can be used for. And I don't know if it's appropriate to read that out right now, but I can send it to you if you wish. Thank you.
CAO?
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I was going to say, to add to what the CFO just suggested, that what we've asked Council approval for tonight is to proceed with the request for quotes to procure the 4 lift stations. So it's possible that you could review the criteria again for the COVID funding that the CFO referenced and offered to send to you. And then we could go ahead and receive the quotes, which will take about a week or so, and then bring it back to Council with the exact funding that we require. We think it's about 50,000 per. I think it's about 150 altogether, including everything, which includes the fence, the cement.
Sorry, we lost you, CAO.
So, sorry, that's another option for Council, is to direct staff to get the actual quotes, and then you could review the criteria again at your leisure, and then review it in context of whether or not you want to use the COVID funding or the sewer surplus funding when you have the actual amounts in hand. It's another option for you.
I agree with that option. Everybody else?
No,
Counselor?
I'm okay with it.
Councillor Kirschner, you're okay with that?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Councillor Paulson?
Yes.
Councillor Tinsley?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. Did we make a resolution on that earlier, or do I have to reread this again here?
Read at least the third one, Mayor Baker.
The third one?
That's the one
Thank
that we'll want to, the second and third, sorry.
Okay, that the staff be directed to proceed with an invitation to tender, RFQ, in order to the Village of Sayward procurement policy number 08-03 for the first step in allocating surplus funds from the sewer service for procurement and installation of 4 generators at the sewer left end station, and that staff finally return to council with details received from the invitation to tender, RFQ, to procure the 4 lift station generators. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? Okay. Opposed? Sorry, CFO, you wanted to jump in there? CFO, you have your hand up?
Sorry, my mistake.
Oh, CAO?
No, I didn't have my hand up. Thank you.
It is.
Oh,
Do
I
I?
see hands, right? Yeah, okay. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. And due to conflict of interest, I'll be stepping out for this, and Deputy Mayor Tinsley will be taking the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just making sure I'm at the right spot. Okay. So this is the staff report on the Salmon River Inn relative to the request for tax waiver and water and sewer user fee reduction. Shall I turn it over to you, CAO Ann?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Tinsley. This report, Council will recall that Council directed staff to return to Council from the May 18th meeting where Mr. Lal appeared as a delegate requesting the waiver. Council also requested some information on that as well as a recommendation. It's quite difficult for staff to recommend this request be granted because the inn has been closed for so long, and given the information that Mr. Lal presented at the last meeting, which was quite light, it didn't indicate any real definite plans for a reopening, and therefore it made it difficult. But the rationale I've provided for the recommendation, which is that the request be denied, is basically that the water and sewer services are required to be self-supporting. And generally that means that all users pay a portion in order to be able to participate in the service. We know that service lots become assets that increase in value because they have sewer services. And so it's difficult to ignore that fact and to write that off given how long the property's been not been operating. Also, there are limited restrictions in the Act that really prevent a local government from providing a subsidy or special benefits to a business. And so that makes it difficult to find a way around. I have provided in the staff report the option to establish a different user fee for the Salmon River. And so council does have the option to establish a different rate and it could establish a lower rate. So I've included in the staff report Schedule E, which is the water use rates that comes from the fee and charges bylaw, and that sets out all of the fees that are in place for users of the water system. So you can see that that they're paying now $194.20 per unit. That's the contribution to the service that they're making under the current wage or the current structure, the water user rate structure. Finally, I guess as a third option, if council was uncomfortable denying the request, council could again request that Mr. Lal provide a written business plan for his startup, including some timeline, startup costs, and a detailed market analysis. We did ask for that in the past, and Mr. Lal indicated he was looking at something like a lodge that could be rented out for family get-togethers or possibly some housing. And so that is an option for council, again, to ask that Mr. Lal provide that information for councils to review. So that is the staff report. Again, it's difficult for staff to recommend this because there are X number of users on the system. The system is self-supporting, and of course we know that there'll be some costs ahead to replace some of the problems that we will inevitably experience with the aging system. And so therefore staff do not recommend that council consider a different rate or that they waive his water and sewer users for the Salmon River Inn. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, CAO. So the recommendation, I'll just put it forward here, is that the Salmon River Inn request for tax waiver and water and sewer user fee reduction staff report be received for information and discussion, and that council deny the request from Mr. Lal to waive his water and sewer user fees for the Salmon River Inn. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Okay, discussion. No discussion at this time? Okay, Councillor Kirschner?
No, I'm happy with that.
No discussion? Okay,
No.
motion carried.
We have to vote on it, don't we?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. All in favor, sorry.
I'm in favor of declining this request, yes.
Yes, I'm in favor of it.
Okay, all in favor, it's unanimous. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Craig.
You're welcome.
I think we can have the mayor return now.
Oh, thank you. Okay. F, respectful workplace policy for approval.
Oh,
Sorry. Councillor Polson?
yes, Mr. Mayor, I just have a question about the page 108 to 112 on the procurement policy, and I don't see it included on the agenda. Have I missed something?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Baker. The procurement policy was attached for reference to guide our work in the request for quotes on the 4 lift station generators. It wasn't on council's table for approval or review, but rather it's in place now. It's been approved a couple of years ago. It was just there for reference to show the thresholds that direct us to get approval from council on various procurement items.
Thank you.
So the recommended resolution that the council respectful workplace policy number 200-3 staff report be received for information and discussion, and that council approve 200-03 respectful workplace policy. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
I'll second that.
Discussion. I have a question regarding the policy itself. Under 4.1, where it says reporting procedures and how do we, now, obviously, I mean, there could be a situation that arises with the CAO in the future. And how do the staff report that? Because all information goes directly to the CAO. There's nothing
Well-
here that states otherwise.
Well, it does reference the mayor as the backup. So if there was a conflict between a CAO and a staff member, the staff member would file, would direct her or his complaint to the mayor as the backup for the CAO.
Should that be implemented into this policy?
It is, with respect, it's right there under reporting contact,
That's
a little
if this,
arrow
if
right.
CAO is not available in his or her absence, then it's to the mayor. If they're not available in his and her absence.
Mm.
So that doesn't really clarify that point, does it?
No.
Yeah, we could make, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up the policy here. It's one of the problems of doing it online here. But yes, if it's not clear, we can certainly make it more clear. And it should be really clear, especially for staff who are reading this maybe for the first time. So if there's a conflict, obviously with the CAO, that we wouldn't expect the staff to have to file a complaint with the CAO. So it might, if you feel that's missing in the policy, we can certainly make that amendment.
I would like to see that added, please. So with the amendment that council approved, policy 200-3, the respectful workplace policy, with the amendment that if it is a complaint against the CAO, that goes directly to the mayor. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second,
I'll second it.
discussion?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yes?
Yeah, I have some.
Councilor Craig?
Yeah, just for clarification, WorkSafe BC also has a line for reporting. So even if for example, the conflict arises with the CAO or even with a member of council or the mayor, WorkSafe BC is a focal point of all complaints. So they encourage you to go up through the chain of command, but it's not necessary to open up a report for a complaint, nor for that complaint to be investigated. Just for a point of clarity on that.
Okay, thank you. CAO, you have your hand up?
Sorry, I hadn't meant to have my hand up, but since it's up, yes, thank you, Councillor Craig. We have actually worked with WorkSafe BC. They've got a copy of this policy and they've reviewed it. And they do provide very good guidance and structure and actually do function as a place where staff can file a complaint. This you know, is an alternative to that. And in fact, this would direct staff to file the complaint to the CAO rather than to WorkSafe BC directly. It doesn't prevent, well, of course, WorkSafe BC's presence, because once a complaint is filed, then there's a WorkSafe BC process that kicks in. But I just wanted to add that this policy would encourage staff to file a complaint with the CAO and then bring in WorkSafe BC, who provides a range of services in the event of a complaint, including counseling. They require investigations to be done and filed with their office within a certain time frame, and so it's a fairly established process that this is intended to complement.
Thank you. Councillor Paulson, you have your hand up?
No, I thought I took it down. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. So opposed? Hearing none. Motion carried. Bylaws. See, none. New business? None. Number 14, question period, maximum 15 minutes. There was no written questions received, but the purpose of the public question period is to permit the people in the gallery to ask questions about issues discussed during a council meeting. Speakers are allowed to ask one question each, If time permits, after everyone has had an opportunity to ask their questions, speaker may be allowed to ask a second question. For the record, they would state their name and address, and given the meeting is being held electronically, any questions would have to be submitted in writing in advance of the adjournment, of the meeting adjournment, pardon me. In camera, none. And adjournment. Recommended resolution that the regular council meeting for June 15th, 2021 be adjourned. Do I have a motion, please?
I motion.
Second,
Second.
do I have discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to the staff for all their work on all the reports. Much appreciated. You all have a wonderful night, and we'll see you in July.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.